Some of Tom Holland's darkest experiences have happened both on and off screen. His breakout role came in The Impossible, based on a family that survived the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, which killed more than 225,000 people across 14 countries. 7-year-old Holland met the real family and heard firsthand what they endured. Years later, he starred in The Crowded Room as a mental case inspired partly by Billy Milligan, who claimed to have 24 different personalities, and became the first person acquitted of major crimes in the US due to dissociative identity disorder. Holland said the psychologically intense role left him so emotionally drained that he took a year off from acting. Around the same period, he was confronting his own dark relationship with alcohol. After attempting Dry January in 2022, Holland realized he was constantly thinking about alcohol, struggled to socialize without it, and felt he needed to drink to relax after stressful days on set. He became concerned by just how difficult it was to stop, later admitting, "I was definitely addicted to alcohol." Holland eventually pushed himself to stay sober for 6 months, saying he became noticeably happier, healthier, and better able to handle problems. He ultimately quit drinking altogether and has remained sober ever since. In 2015, Caitlyn Jenner rear-ended a 69-year-old woman at a red light who was thrown into oncoming traffic and fatally struck by a Hummer. Jenner claims the paparazzi was at fault for the crash after constantly stalking the reality star and pulling up too closely to Caitlyn's car. The case was settled outside of court as Jenner avoided any charges for the tragedy. Shoes discovered in the wreckage of the Titanic are often found in pairs because they were worn by the victims when they died. Their entire bodies disintegrated, but the shoes remained intact due to protective oils in the leather. In 2012, Nigerian businessman and polygamist Yoroko Onaja died after 5 of his 6 wives forced him to have intercourse with each of them. They were apparently jealous of the attention he gave to his youngest wife and threatened him with knives, demanding he sleep with them. Onaja managed to have intercourse with 4 of them, but apparently had a heart attack and stopped breathing before reaching the 5th. In 1998, SNL star and renowned voice actor Phil Hartman was shockingly killed in his sleep by his wife Brynn. She then showed her friend the body, locked herself in a bathroom, and turned the gun on herself. Futurama's Philip J. Fry was named in honor of Phil Hartman, who was supposed to be the voice of Zapp Brannigan before he died. About 50% of panda births result in twins, but panda moms always focus on raising their strongest cub while letting the other ones starve to death. Therefore, zookeepers have to switch the cubs every few hours to trick the mom into caring for both. In 2019, a horrific bungee cord accident caused this Taiwanese man's iris to completely collapse. The father of physics, Max Planck, lived a life that was filled with tragedy. His wife died young, his oldest son died in World War I, his 2 twin daughters both died while giving birth, and his second son was executed by Nazi Germany because of a failed assassination attempt on Hitler. In 2021, Tessica Brown ran out of her regular hairspray, so she tried using Gorilla Glue spray instead. Her hair then became stuck to her scalp for more than a month, despite hundreds of attempts to wash it out. Brown says she felt so helpless that she stopped eating and lost more than 10 pounds over a short span. Eventually, a plastic surgeon performed a 4-hour-long surgery on her for free to remove the adhesive. Once described as a genius, Russian man Anatoly Moskvin was a well-respected linguist and historian until he was discovered to be living with the corpses of 26 girls in his parents' home. He apparently dug them up from local cemeteries before mummifying and dressing them like dolls. Anatoly's parents were well aware of the dolls but had no idea they contained real human corpses. After his arrest, Moskvin stated that he had great sympathy for the dead children and believed that one day they could be brought back to life through science or black magic. He's been forced to live in a mental hospital since 2012. Pat Morita, the actor who played Mr. Miyagi, spent the first 9 years of his life in a hospital due to tuberculosis. After undergoing extensive surgery and finally learning how to walk, he was sent to a Japanese internment camp in Arizona. During the 4th century BC in Nordlingen, Germany, this 9-year-old boy became severely disabled following a leg infection, was killed by a blow to the head, then thrown into a grain silo that was reused as a garbage pit. A Queen's Guard horse named Obelisk used to lure in pigeons by dropping oats from his mouth. When they got close enough to him, he would brutally stomp them to death. Obelisk was eventually sent away for additional psychological training. Considered one of the greatest strength athletes of all time, Icelandic powerlifter John Paul Sigmarsson once famously said, "There's no reason to be alive if you can't do deadlift." A few years later, at the young age of 32, he died of an aortic rupture while deadlifting in his gym. This woman was caught on camera doing something deeply disturbing to win a chess match. Earlier this year, Russian pro chess player Amina Abakarova apparently needed a way to knock her opponent out of a tournament. So she decided to go to the extreme and poison the woman, 30-year-old Ume Osmanova, in what's being treated as an assassination attempt. Amina poured mercury from a thermometer onto the victim's chessboard before her next match and smeared it all over her side of the board with one of the pieces. Osmanova said she began feeling unwell during her match 30 minutes later, complaining of sudden severe nausea and dizziness, prompting an immediate call for medical assistance. After the security footage was reviewed by authorities, Amina had no choice but to confess to the murder attempt. Osmanova ended up making a full recovery, as the attacker was banned from future chess competitions and stripped of her previous titles. Abakarova now potentially faces several years in Russian prison for the senseless attack. In 2011, 6-year-old Illinois boy Timothy Pitson was taken out of school by his mother to go on a trip. This video shows Florida mother Brianna Williams puking after hearing the news that the body of her missing 5-year-old daughter Taylor had been discovered. Williams first reported Taylor missing in April of 2019, 7 months before her body was found. But in reality, Brianna had horribly neglected her daughter until she tragically ended up starving to death. Brianna secretly placed Taylor's body in the back of her car, wrapped her in a garbage bag, and buried her in a shallow grave. Williams pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. Often called the world's youngest political prisoner, in 1995, Gendun Chukinima was chosen at the age of 6 as the next Panchen Lama, the second highest authority of Tibetan Buddhism and the selector of the next Dalai Lama. But 3 days after being chosen, the boy and his family were kidnapped by the Chinese government and haven't been seen nor heard from in nearly 30 years since. In 1986, 21-year-old Christopher Thomas Knight ran out of gas in rural Maine, entered the woods, and lived there for the next 27 years without human contact. He survived by committing over 1,000 burglaries against houses in the area to be able to endure the harsh winters of Maine. Knight was eventually captured by a game warden and sentenced to 7 months in jail, later vowing to live normally and to never steal again. In the 19th century, African woman Sarah Bartman was displayed as a freak show attraction in Europe for her unusually large backside. Marketed as the missing link between man and beast, she was often brought out as an exhibit at wealthy parties and private events. In 1815, Sarah died of an unknown illness at the age of 26, likely as a result of her poor living conditions. Her remains were later displayed in the French Museum of Natural History for over a century, before she was finally laid to rest in her native South Africa in 2002. In November of '99, the girlfriend of Panthers wide receiver Ray Caruth was shot 4 times and later died in the hospital. It was soon determined that her NFL boyfriend had hired a hitman to kill her after she reportedly refused to abort their baby. The baby ended up surviving, and Caruth went to prison for 19 years before being released in 2018. During a tense pro basketball game in 1992, Serbian player Boban Jankovic was frustrated with a foul call and slammed his head into a padded concrete post. He immediately dropped to the floor and was never able to walk again after badly damaging his spinal cord. Earlier this year, 44-year-old Pennsylvania man John Matthew Chapman was sentenced to life in prison after driving his girlfriend across the country and luring her into a Nevada desert for a bondage photo shoot. He then bound her to a signpost with zip ties, taped her mouth and nose shut, and watched as she died. In Connecticut, 1986, 39-year-old flight attendant Helly Crafts was brutally murdered by her husband Richard after she caught him cheating on her. He then put her body through a wood chipper and ground her remains into a lake. Richard was sentenced to 50 years in prison but has since been released. Today would have been the 50th birthday of Iranian filmmaker Babak Karamdan. In 2021, he was murdered by his parents in an honor killing for still being single at the age of 46. Babak's parents confessed to drugging and stabbing their son several times. later stating that they were proud of their actions and showed no remorse. An Indiana judge recently ruled that taxpayers will be funding the sex reassignment surgery of a vicious murderer in prison. Jonathan Richardson was convicted of fatally strangling his 11-month-old stepdaughter in 2001. The ruling states that the surgery is a medical necessity that is required to prevent a risk of serious bodily and psychological harm. Christine Palillo was a bullied outcast at school until two popular girls befriended her and gave her a makeover, helping her achieve the title of Miss Irresistible from her school's student body. But just a few months later, Christine and her drug addict boyfriend would end up brutally murdering the girls and two others in a botched drug deal. One of the girls tried desperately crawling to her phone after being shot in the groin, until Christine bashed her skull in with the butt of her revolver. Serial killer Dennis Rader used to install security systems for homeowners. Many of his clients wanted the security systems to keep the BTK killer from ever entering their homes, unaware that he was in fact the one installing them. In 2017, Glenna Durham killed her husband after shooting him 5 times. Soon afterwards, the couple's pet African gray parrot started repeating the words "don't effing shoot" in the husband's voice. These were assumed to be the husband's last words, and the woman was eventually found guilty of first-degree murder and left a note saying Timothy is safe at the hands of someone trustworthy and would never be found. The boy hasn't been seen since, as here's an updated age progression image of what he may look like now. The Vietnamese version of Cinderella is much darker than the family-friendly version we know and love. In the end, Cinderella boils her stepsister to death, turns what remains of her into a sauce, and sends it to her stepmother to eat. She enjoys the sauce so much that she eats it all until she finds the skull of her dead daughter and dies from shock. In 2015, a 46-year-old woman accidentally took 55 milligrams of pure LSD, equal to a staggering 550 times the typical dosage. She apparently blacked out for the first 12 hours and felt pleasantly high for the second 12. The next day, her lifelong foot pain had ceased, which helped her kick her morphine addiction. Found in a jungle cave in 1867, a feral boy named Dina Sanichar preferred eating raw meat, had trouble standing on 2 legs, growled like a wolf, chewed on bones to sharpen his teeth, and never learned how to speak. He eventually became the inspiration for Mowgli in the Jungle Book. In 2016, 11-year-old Nebraska girl Lulu Gilreath was going on her first carnival ride when it quickly turned into anyone's worst nightmare. Her hair got caught in the machinery of a spinning ride at a carnival, and her scalp was almost completely torn off. The horrible accident damaged both of her eyes and nearly killed her. After World War II, Japanese General Hitoshi Imamura was sentenced to 10 years in prison after failing to control his unit, which committed horrible atrocities toward Allied soldiers. Believing that his own sentence was too light compared to the men under his command, Imamura built a replica prison in his garden where he stayed for decades until his death in 1968. According to Hinduism, the Yamuna River is considered a river of heaven and is believed to cleanse the mind of sin. Every year, thousands of people drink from and bathe in the water despite its toxic foam, which is the result of poorly treated sewage that's constantly dumped directly into the river. Various chemicals in the foam are known to have many negative health effects, including skin irritation, hair loss, breathing issues, and brain damage. Earlier this year, a former model and Miss Switzerland finalist was allegedly murdered by her husband, who then reportedly dismembered her body and pureed her remains in a blender. In 1947, there was a case in Louisiana where a young man failed to die during a botched electric chair execution, so his lawyers tried to argue that he had already been executed and that it was cruel to go through it a second time. After much deliberation, the Supreme Court eventually ruled against him, and the man was successfully executed by electric chair the next year. The double rainbow guy Paul Vasquez was a constant uploader on YouTube and created thousands of videos. Even though he died of an illness in 2020 at the age of 57, he scheduled 15 years of uploads in advance before he died, leaving his channel still very active now 4 years after his death. This is the tragic transformation of Florida man Robert Hardister, who was arrested 9 separate times for various infractions over an 8-year span. British doctor Thomas Kwan recently attempted to murder his mother's partner in one of the strangest ways possible. He disguised himself as a nurse and knocked on the man's door to offer him a free COVID jab. But instead of the vaccine, he put an unidentified poison in the syringe and injected it into his stepdad's arm. The next day, the man experienced serious pain and blistering in his shoulder, prompting him to go to the hospital and having part of his arm removed. He ended up surviving the bizarre attack, and Kwan was charged with attempted murder. American actor and model John Eric Hexum was once seen as the next big thing in Hollywood due to his charming looks, charisma, and radio voice. But in 1984, he died on the set of the TV show Cover Up after accidentally discharging a blank cartridge into his skull. Hexum had apparently been playing Russian roulette with a prop gun during a break in filming, and the muzzle blast caused enough blunt force trauma to fracture a piece of his skull that propelled into his brain. Serial killer Israel Keyes went the extra mile to ensure that he would never be detected. He had no preferred victim type and never killed in the same area twice. For one murder, he flew to Chicago and drove 1,000 miles all the way to Vermont in a rental car, then used a murder kit he'd hidden there 2 years prior. When shopping on his murder trips, he always kept his phone turned off and only ever paid in cash. But Keyes was caught in 2012 after using a victim's credit card when he didn't have any cash on hand. JFK's older brother Joseph most likely would have been the presidential candidate instead, but was killed in a top-secret flying mission during World War II. John once said that he never would have gotten into politics if his brother Joe had survived. In 2014, a Jamaican phone scammer threatened to kill a retired American man named William Webster when he wouldn't fall for his scam. But the scammer didn't know that Webster was the former director of both the FBI and the CIA. When he flew to New York City in 2017, he was immediately arrested and sentenced to 6 years in prison. In 1740, Ivan VI became Emperor of Russia when he was only 2 months old following the death of his Empress mother. Just 1 year into his reign, the baby was overthrown by his cousin and sent to prison. He spent the next 20 years of his life in solitary confinement without any of the guards knowing his true identity, before eventually being killed in a failed rescue attempt, as was the plan if he ever tried to escape. This is the tragic story of the Boy Scout who made his entire neighborhood radioactive. Nicknamed the Princess of R&B, popular singer Aaliyah lost her life in a tragic private plane crash when she was just 22 years old. Despite being warned that there was far too much weight for a safe flight, she and her entourage were eager to return home and demanded to leave immediately. Shortly after takeoff, the plane lost its balance and crashed just 200 feet from the runway, killing everyone on board. In 2013, the body of 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson was found inside of a rolled-up gym mat at his Georgia high school. Authorities later concluded that he had become trapped upside down while trying to retrieve his shoes, and eventually died from positional asphyxia. In 2002, schizophrenic British artist Richard Sumner entered a remote forest in Wales. He apparently handcuffed himself to a tree and threw the keys out of reach. His skeleton was found 3 years later, with evidence suggesting he likely regretted his decision. Liam Neeson's wife, actress Natasha Richardson, was taking a beginner ski lesson on a bunny hill when she suddenly fell without a helmet on. She initially refused any medical help but complained about a severe headache a few hours later. Richardson was soon flown to the hospital where she died 2 days later from a brain bleed. A park ranger on Rinka Island once sat down in his office and was attacked by a Komodo dragon hiding under his desk. Turns out the cleaner had accidentally left the door open the night before and the massive lizard snuck inside. The ranger received 30 stitches at the hospital and managed to survive, but has since quit his job and now suffers from PTSD. Harvard Law School professor Roger Fisher had an interesting idea to prevent the unjustified launch of nuclear weapons. He proposed implanting the U.S. nuclear launch codes inside a person's body next to their heart, so that the president would have to take a life in order to activate the country's nuclear weapons. Nicknamed the Nuclear Boy Scout, David Hahn was a teenager from Michigan who was obsessed with nuclear radiation. When he was only 15, David attempted to build a nuclear reactor in his backyard shed, using radioactive material from household items including vintage clocks, smoke detectors, and gun sights. Within 2 years, David had built a functioning reactor which gave off enough radiation to be detected throughout his entire neighborhood. David was soon caught by police when they found hazardous materials in his car during a routine stop and thought he was building an atomic bomb. When David's shed was raided by the EPA, they determined that his project had created dangerous levels of radiation, leading them to dismantle the building and classify it as hazardous waste. This mugshot from 2006 shows David covered in sores as a result of his extensive exposure to radiation. This, combined with continuous legal and mental health issues, led to David's early passing at the age of 39 from an accidental overdose. In 2009, Florida woman Carol Bryan received facial fillers that were mistakenly injected into the wrong spot, causing her forehead to swell up so severely that she went blind in one eye. Carol went from a fashion model to a recluse, refusing to leave her home for years due to the monstrous appearance of her face. Medical students in the UK were recently left astonished after the autopsy of a 78-year-old man. He unknowingly lived his whole life with 3 dicks, an extremely rare condition known as supernumerary penile formation. Polish adventurer Alexander Doba kayaked solo across the Atlantic 3 times, once at the age of 70. 4 years later, he reached the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, sat down for a break, fell asleep, and never woke up. In 2009, 2 women bet 28-year-old Russian man Sergei Tuganov $4,300 that he couldn't last 12 hours in bed with them. He won the bet, but later suffered a fatal heart attack after consuming an entire bottle of Viagra. George Lopez has a genetic condition that caused his kidneys to slowly deteriorate. So when he needed a new kidney in 2005, his wife Anne gave him one of her own. A couple years later, George reportedly cheated on his wife, then divorced her in 2010, all while wearing her kidney. The first scientist to observe penguins engaging in gay intercourse, grape, and necrophilia was so disturbed that he tried to obscure his findings to prevent people from knowing the truth about penguins. In 1995, a substitute school bus driver in Illinois stopped at a red light with the back part of the bus still on some train tracks. The children were screaming for her to move the bus forward as a train approached, but she was confused about what they meant. The train struck the bus at 60 miles per hour and 7 children were killed. In 2018, Gloria Williams pleaded guilty to posing as a nurse to abduct Kamaya Mobley from her mother's arms in the maternity ward. She was sentenced to 18 years in prison, the same length of time Kamaya was separated from her birth family. Earlier this week, New York State officials raided the home of social media star Peanut the squirrel and seized him from their owners before tragically euthanizing their beloved pet. Peanut was a rescue squirrel who was taken in more than 7 years ago by animal refuge owner Mark Longo. Having lost half its tail in a severe attack, Peanut wasn't adept enough to survive in the wild, so Longo decided to care for the squirrel in his home, eventually turning him into an adorable online sensation. According to reports, the state's DEC received multiple anonymous complaints about Peanut before showing up to Longo's home with at least 6 officers to confiscate the pet along with their rescue raccoon named Fred. The scumbag DEC claim that it's illegal to keep young wildlife as pets since they're not well suited for life in captivity and may carry viruses. Upon hearing about Peanut and Fred's deaths, Longo tearfully posted that he was in deep shock and grief since Peanut was the best thing that ever happened to us. This is the harrowing skull of a man with Proteus syndrome, a rare and awful condition characterized by the overgrowth of skin, organs, tissues, and bones. Nikola Tesla originally expected to live to the age of 150, but later lowered this estimate to 135 years when he was forced to give up alcohol due to prohibition. He thought that consuming alcohol was good for the body and was a heavy drinker as a result. Tesla ended up dying at the age of 86. When revolutionary hero Guy Fawkes was convicted of high treason in 1605, his punishment was to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, meaning he would be hanged almost to the point of death, have his intestines and sex organs removed while still alive, decapitated, and have his limbs torn off. After the sentencing, Fawkes said "fuck that" and leapt from the gallows so that the rope broke his neck and killed him immediately. The drawing and quartering was still performed on his corpse, and his body parts were paraded around London. In 2001, actress Rebecca Gayheart struck and killed a 9-year-old boy who was attempting to cross the street. Other cars had stopped to allow the boy to cross, but she apparently lost her patience and drove into the turn lane to go around them, accidentally running the boy over in the process. She only received probation and a $2,800 fine. A Canadian man getting a rectal exam by his doctor at the hospital was observed by people he assumed were medical students. but he ended up suing the hospital and the observers after learning they were actors who played doctors on the TV show Saving Hope and were trying to prepare for their roles. A man from Alabama recently died after having the wrong organ removed during a horrific surgery in Florida. 70-year-old Bill Bryan was scheduled to have his spleen removed, but the surgeon mistakenly removed his liver instead. According to medical records, the surgeon didn't realize his mistake at the time and proceeded to label the removed liver specimen as spleen. Last September, 39-year-old Florida mom Kathy Griffith was brutally stabbed to death by her teenage son Colin. He called 911 saying, "I had a very, very long fight with my mom. She fell on a knife and she's bleeding from the neck." Police arriving at the scene described Colin as showing zero emotion, and the first thing he said to them was, "I know my rights." This all transpired just 1 year after Colin was charged with fatally shooting his divorced father Charles, but was released on the claim of self-defense. Kathy trusted her son at the time and even bailed him out of jail. Leading up to Kathy's murder, Colin had reportedly threatened to kill his mother many times, but she continued to love him unconditionally. He was said to be a very spoiled child who had been in and out of mental facilities for years after being diagnosed with PTSD. According to reports, Colin developed this after being held captive by his father for over 1,000 days without human contact upon telling his dad that he was gay. Colin has been charged with first-degree murder, as prosecutors have described him as a violent murderer who must be kept separate from civil society. Known for his historically cruel behavior, Roman Emperor Nero accidentally killed his pregnant wife by kicking her to death. He then found a young boy named Sporus who looked exactly like her, castrated him, then married him. Nero would call the boy by his deceased wife's name and dress him in women's clothing, while making his court play along with this disturbing act. The unsettling relationship would come to an end when Nero died in 68 AD, but this was only the beginning of the boy's suffering. For the next 3 Roman emperors, Sporus would serve as a royal sex slave. One of these horrible emperors, named Vitellius, planned on humiliating the boy in a public performance. In the middle of the gladiator games, Sporus would be graped in front of a stadium crowd as a reenactment of the Grape of Proserpina, after which he would be publicly executed. Upon hearing about this sinister plan, this elderly couple just agreed to be euthanized. Former Royal Air Force engineer Pete Scott and his retired nurse wife Christine have signed up for a double SUI pod in Switzerland, where voluntary assisted SUI has been legal since 1942. The pair made the decision after 80-year-old Christine was diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia. Married for 46 years, they plan to die peacefully together in each other's arms with the help of the sarcophagus pod. This controversial death capsule works by replacing air with 100% nitrogen, which quickly renders the occupant unconscious and fully stops their breathing within 10 minutes, resulting in a swift, painless death. As stated by Pete, "We have had long, happy, healthy, fulfilled lives, but here we are in old age and it does not do nice things to you. The idea of watching the slow degradation of Chris's mental abilities is horrific to me. Obviously I would care for her to the point I could not, but she has nursed enough people with dementia throughout her career to be adamant that she wants to remain in control of herself and her life. Assisted dying gives her that opportunity, and I would not want to go on living without her." In 1978, Hustler magazine owner Larry Flynt was shot in the spine by a white supremacist serial killer, who was apparently outraged by an interracial photo shoot in one of the magazine editions. Flynt survived the murder attempt but was left permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Years later, Flynt pleaded for his attacker to be spared from execution, saying, "A government that forbids killing among its citizens should not be in the business of killing people itself." But with up to 22 total victims and the desire to start a race war, the serial killer was eventually put to death by lethal injection. Around 1:30 a.m. in August of 2021, a woman wearing only a bra and leggings was captured on a trail cam in a remote North Carolina forest. 3 hours later, she was captured again, this time walking much slower with a noticeable limp. 6 months later, the woman's remains were found in the same area, still wearing the same clothing. Despite all efforts to identify her, the woman remains a complete mystery to this day. In 2004, a deranged fan rushed the stage during the first song at a Pantera concert and fatally shot legendary guitarist Dimebag Darrell multiple times with a pistol. He then killed 3 others attempting to subdue him while injuring 3 more before before being shot in the head by an officer. The killer's motive remains unclear to this day. During a live firing demonstration in 1942, a Royal Air Force pilot accidentally opened fire on a crowd of spectators. 25 British soldiers were killed, while another 71 were wounded after being mistaken for dummies. After his floppy trouser snake was torn off in a car accident when he was 6 years old, 43-year-old Mohammed Abad received a fully functional bionic 8-inch pecker. It was constructed over a 3-year period using skin grafts, and is complete with a mechanical interior and a fluid pouch to give him erections at the press of a button. According to the surgeons involved, its function is still complete enough for Abad to be able to father a child with his still intact right nut. This was the moment a jewelry store was wiped out in just 30 seconds. In 2025 in Fremont, California, nearly 24 thieves stormed into Kumar Jewelers at once, armed with hammers and tools. Within seconds, they began smashing display cases and sweeping jewelry into bags as employees were forced to stand back. By the time it was over, $1.7 million worth of jewelry, about 80% of the store's inventory, was wiped out in just over a minute. The group dispersed in multiple getaway cars, and several arrests were later made, but most of the crew remains unidentified, and the majority of the stolen jewelry has never been found. In New York City, Darius McCollum developed an obsessive fixation on the transit system that led him to repeatedly impersonate MTA employees and take control of buses and subway trains. Beginning as a teenager, he was arrested more than 30 times after entering restricted areas, operating vehicles, and running full routes while delivering accurate announcements and staying on schedule. He wasn't stealing the vehicles or trying to escape, he was operating the job with precision. Each incident still carried real risk, and over time the pattern didn't stop. He continued being arrested well into adulthood, spending years cycling through jail and psychiatric evaluations. Despite national attention and a 2016 documentary about his case, there was still no long-term solution put in place, as he remained stuck between the transit system he was obsessed with and a justice system that had no idea how to effectively handle the situation. When Carla Homolka met active serial rapist Paul Bernardo in 1987, they quickly formed a heinously criminal relationship. The pair would go on to rape and murder at least 3 young girls, including Carla's own little sister, Tammy. On Christmas Eve in 1990, Carla allegedly gave 15-year-old Tammy's virginity to Paul as a Christmas gift after drugging her with tranquilizers. Tammy ended up choking to death on her own vomit and died, after which Carla put on her deceased sister's clothes and proceeded to have intercourse with Paul on the girl's bed. Tammy's death was ruled an accident, and the couple went on to kidnap 2 more teenage girls, holding them captive for several days while abusing, sodomizing, and eventually killing them. When their crimes were uncovered, police found videotapes of the couple performing these heinous acts on their victims. Carla managed to negotiate a plea deal known as the Deal with the Devil in exchange for her testimony against Paul. He's now spending the rest of his life in prison, while Carla is happily remarried with children.